The year is 2024. The hallowed halls of Geneva resonate with the weight of global expectation. The Global Leadership Summit, a crucible of international diplomacy and strategic vision, convenes. World leaders, diplomats, and influential figures from every corner of the globe gather. Their presence a testament to the summit's critical role in shaping the future of our interconnected world. This year, however, a different energy pulsates through the proceedings. A new voice, a powerful voice, is about to be heard. Stepping onto the world stage, a figure commands attention, a figure whose youth belies the depth of his wisdom and the unwavering conviction in his gaze. This is IBRAHIM Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, a nation grappling with its past and forging a path toward a brighter future. President Traoré's presence is not merely symbolic. It represents a seismic shift in the global political landscape. His journey to this pivotal moment is one marked by resilience, determination, and an unyielding commitment to his people. A young leader, rising from the heart of Africa, President Traoré embodies a new generation of African leadership, one that refuses to be defined by the limitations of the past. He is a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the marginalized, and a beacon of hope in a world often characterized by inequality and injustice. His arrival at the Global Leadership Summit is not accidental. It is a calculated move, a deliberate assertion of Burkina Faso's rightful place in the global community. His presence heralds a new era, an era where Africa's voice will no longer be muted, but amplified, resonating with the power and the unwavering conviction of a continent determined to shape its own destiny. The stage is set. The world listens. President Traoré is about to speak, and what he has to say will change everything. His words, delivered with a calm yet unwavering conviction, will challenge the established order, ignite a global conversation, and ultimately inspire a movement for justice and lasting change. This is the story of a leader, a continent, and a world on the precipice of transformation. The air crackled with anticipation. All eyes were on President Traoré as he turned his gaze directly towards President Macron of France. This was not a diplomatic dance. This was a direct confrontation, a public reckoning of historical injustices. The unspoken tension between these two leaders, representatives of vastly different perspectives on Franco-African relations, hung heavy in the air. It was a moment pregnant with history, a collision of narratives that had simmered for decades, finally erupting into the full light of the global stage. President Traoré's words, delivered with a measured yet unwavering intensity, directly challenged the long-standing narrative of French influence in Africa. He didn't mince words, highlighting the legacy of colonial exploitation and its enduring impact on Burkina Faso and the continent as a whole. His pointed criticisms directly confronted France's historical role, not as a benevolent partner, but as a power that had systematically extracted resources and undermined African sovereignty. The key point of contention centered on the economic agreements that had bound many African nations to France for decades, agreements that President Traoré argued were inherently unfair and exploitative. He spoke of the disparity between Africa's abundant natural resources and the persistent poverty that plagues many of its nations, a stark contrast that he directly attributed to these unequal partnerships. The legacy of neo-colonialism, President Traoré asserted, was not a relic of the past, but a present reality, hindering Africa's progress and perpetuating a cycle of dependency. President Macron, while acknowledging some historical complexities, defended France's current engagement with Africa, emphasizing its commitment to development and partnership. However, President Traoré's powerful counterarguments, grounded in the lived realities of the Burkinabe people, resonated deeply with the audience, highlighting the stark contrast between the official narrative and the lived experiences of millions across the continent. This public exchange, far from being a mere diplomatic disagreement, was a pivotal moment, a turning point in the ongoing conversation about the future of Franco-African relations and the urgent need to address the enduring legacy of colonialism. The confrontation served as a powerful catalyst for change, forcing a global reevaluation of the historical narrative and the need for true partnership, not exploitation. President Traoré's powerful address didn't shy away from the uncomfortable truths of history. He meticulously deconstructed the narrative of benevolent colonialism, revealing it as a system of calculated exploitation that continues to cast a long shadow over Africa. His words painted a vivid picture of a continent systematically stripped of its resources, its people subjugated, and its potential stifled for generations. He cited specific examples, illustrating how the arbitrary drawing of borders during the scramble for Africa carved up nations, ignoring existing ethnic and cultural lines, creating internal conflicts that persist to this day. He spoke of the extraction of vast mineral wealth, gold, diamonds, uranium, often under exploitative contracts that left African nations with minimal economic benefit while enriching Western powers. The legacy of these agreements, he argued, continues to fuel inequality and hinder development. Traoré's critique extended beyond the purely economic. He highlighted the social and cultural devastation wrought by colonialism, the erosion of traditional governance structures, and the imposition of foreign systems that often failed to meet the needs of the local population. He spoke of the lasting impact on education, healthcare, and infrastructure, illustrating how colonial policies often prioritize the extraction of resources over the well-being of the people. The suppression of local languages and the imposition of foreign ones further contributed to a loss of cultural identity and hindered the development of self-sufficient communities. The president connected these historical injustices to the contemporary challenges faced by African nations. He argued that the economic underdevelopment, political instability, and social inequalities that plague many African countries are not accidental, but are the direct consequences of centuries of exploitation. He presented a powerful case for understanding the present-day challenges through the lens of historical context, urging a shift from viewing Africa as a recipient of aid to recognizing it as a continent with immense potential, hampered by a history of unjust practices. His words served as a stark reminder that true development requires a reckoning with the past and a commitment to building a future based on equity and justice. Only then, he implied, can Africa truly reach its full potential. To truly understand the depth of President Traoré's message, we must consider the lived realities of those most affected by historical and ongoing injustices. Let us introduce you to Amadou. Amadou is a 12-year-old boy from a small village in Burkina Faso. His days are not filled with the carefree joys of childhood. Instead, they are consumed by the relentless struggle for survival. Each morning, before the sun crests the horizon, Amadou embarks on a perilous journey, a trek of several miles to fetch water for his family. This arduous task, often performed under the scorching sun, takes hours, leaving him exhausted and with little time for school or play. His small hands, weathered beyond his years, carry the heavy burden of responsibility far beyond what any child should bear. Amadou's story is not unique. It is a reflection of the harsh realities faced by millions of children across Africa, children whose potential is stifled by poverty, conflict, and a lack of opportunity. They are denied access to education, healthcare, and the basic necessities of life. Their futures blighted by circumstances beyond their control. Their struggles are a stark reminder of the human cost of historical exploitation and the urgent need for lasting change. Amadou's story, though fictionalized, embodies the countless untold narratives of children whose lives are shaped by the consequences of historical injustices. It serves as a poignant illustration of the human face of poverty and inequality, a powerful testament to the urgent need for sustainable development and equitable opportunities for all. It is through understanding Amadou's experience that we can truly appreciate the profound significance of President Traoré's call for justice and empowerment, a call that resonates with the hopes and aspirations of millions across the African continent. His story underscores the need for immediate and transformative change, a change that will ensure that future generations will not have to endure the same hardships. President Traoré's address boldly challenged a deeply ingrained narrative, the pervasive perception of endemic corruption within Africa. He didn't shy away from acknowledging the existence of corruption, but he vehemently rejected the simplistic explanation that it was solely an internal African problem. Instead, he presented a far more nuanced and complex argument, placing the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of Western powers and their exploitative practices. Traoré argued that the historical legacy of colonialism and neocolonialism created a system where corruption is not merely a symptom, but a direct consequence of deeply ingrained power imbalances. He highlighted how unequal trade agreements, designed to benefit Western nations at the expense of African countries, create fertile ground for corruption to flourish. These agreements, he asserted, often leave African nations with little choice but to engage in practices that compromise their integrity in order to survive in a system rigged against them. He pointed to the opaque nature of many international contracts, often negotiated behind closed doors, without transparency or accountability. These contracts, he argued, frequently favor multinational corporations and Western governments, leaving African nations with little bargaining power and limited capacity to negotiate fair terms. This inherent inequality, he contended, fosters a culture of corruption where officials are forced to make difficult choices in the face of overwhelming economic pressure. Traoré's challenge to the simplistic corruption narrative was not merely an indictment of Western powers. It was a call for a fundamental reassessment of international relations and a demand for fairer, more equitable trade practices. He argued that true progress in combating corruption in Africa requires a concerted effort to dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality and create an environment where African nations can thrive on their own terms. His compelling argument shifted the focus from internal culpability to the systemic factors that contribute to the problem, laying bare the intricate web of power dynamics and historical injustices that have fueled corruption for decades. President Traoré didn't merely offer abstract accusations. He provided concrete examples of the exploitative contracts that have crippled African development. He meticulously detailed agreements where African nations ceded control of their natural resources, mines, forests, and fertile lands, in exchange for minimal compensation and with little say in the terms of the contracts. These agreements, often signed under duress or with limited understanding of their implications, have resulted in the systematic depletion of African wealth, leaving little for the benefit of the local population. He cited instances where foreign corporations, often backed by powerful Western governments, have exploited loopholes in international law to extract vast profits, leaving behind environmental devastation and social disruption. These corporations, he argued, often operate with impunity, shielded from accountability by complex legal frameworks and the lack of effective regulatory mechanisms in many African nations. The result is a system where wealth is extracted from the continent, leaving behind little for its people and perpetuating a cycle of economic dependency. Traoré highlighted how many of these contracts include clauses that grant foreign corporations extensive rights and protections, often at the expense of local communities and the environment. These clauses, he argued, have been instrumental in hindering the development of local industries and preventing African nations from achieving economic self-sufficiency. He emphasized how these agreements often tie African nations to specific trading partners, limiting their ability to diversify their markets and negotiate better terms. This economic dependence, he argued, is a direct consequence of historical and ongoing exploitative practices. The president's detailed examples served as a powerful indictment of a system designed to perpetuate inequality and hinder African development. His words served as a rallying cry for a renegotiation of these agreements and a commitment to fostering truly equitable partnerships. President Traoré's address ignited a firestorm of reactions within the Global Leadership Summit and beyond. The immediate responses were as diverse as the assembled leaders themselves, ranging from enthusiastic support to outright dismissal. Some world leaders, Deeply moved by Traoré's powerful indictment of historical injustices and ongoing exploitation, offered their vocal support, acknowledging the validity of his concerns and pledging to reevaluate their nation's relationships with African countries. These leaders recognized the urgency of addressing the systemic inequalities that have plagued the continent for centuries. However, the response was not universally positive. Other leaders, representing nations with significant economic interests in Africa, were less receptive to Traoré's critique. They dismissed his accusations as overly simplistic or politically motivated, clinging to the established narrative of internal African failings. This divergence in reactions highlighted the deeply entrenched power dynamics that continue to shape the global landscape and underscored the challenges in fostering truly equitable international relations. The international media seized upon the speech, broadcasting Traoré's message to a global audience. This widespread coverage sparked intense debate and discussions, forcing a reevaluation of long-held perceptions of Africa. Traoré's powerful words challenged the prevailing narrative of African dependency and helplessness, replacing it with a compelling vision of a continent demanding its rightful place on the world stage. The varied reactions, though revealing of existing biases and power structures, also served to amplify Traoré's message, bringing the issues of neocolonialism and economic exploitation into sharper focus on the global stage. The immediate global response, both positive and negative, underscored the profound impact of Traoré's speech and its ability to galvanize international attention on critical issues of global justice. President Traoré's impassioned speech transcended national borders, igniting a powerful Pan-African movement demanding self-determination and economic justice. His words resonated deeply across the continent, inspiring a surge of solidarity and action. Civil society organizations, previously operating in relative isolation, found common ground in Traoré's message, forging new alliances and amplifying their collective voice. Grassroots movements, energized by his call to action, organized protests and demonstrations across multiple African nations, demanding an end to exploitative practices and a fairer share of global resources. Prominent intellectuals and academics joined the chorus, providing intellectual backing and historical context to Traoré's arguments, further legitimizing the movement's demands. Their research highlighted the lasting impact of colonialism and neocolonialism, providing irrefutable evidence to support Traoré's claims of systemic injustice. This intellectual support bolstered the movement's credibility and provided a powerful counter-narrative to those who sought to dismiss Traoré's message as mere rhetoric. The movement wasn't solely confined to the streets. It also found expression in the digital sphere. Social media platforms became vibrant hubs for sharing information, mobilizing support, and coordinating actions. The hashtag #AfricaUprising became a symbol of the burgeoning movement, connecting activists, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens across the continent and beyond. This digital activism facilitated rapid information dissemination and allowed the movement to transcend geographical boundaries, creating a powerful network of solidarity and collective action. The emergence of this Pan-African movement demonstrated the profound impact of Traoré's speech. It showcased the power of a single voice to ignite a continent-wide movement demanding justice, self-determination, and an end to the legacy of exploitation. The unified efforts of civil society organizations, intellectuals, activists, and ordinary citizens demonstrated the unwavering resolve of a continent determined to shape its own future. President Traoré's speech wasn't simply a powerful condemnation. It served as a catalyst for immediate and significant policy changes within Burkina Faso. Recognizing the urgent need for reform, the government swiftly implemented a series of measures aimed at addressing the very issues Traoré had highlighted. These changes were not merely symbolic gestures. They represented a concerted effort to restructure the nation's economic and political landscape. One of the most significant changes involved a comprehensive review of existing contracts with foreign corporations. Agreements deemed exploitative were renegotiated, ensuring fairer terms and greater benefits for the Burkinabe people. This included increased revenue sharing, stricter environmental regulations, and greater transparency in the extraction and distribution of natural resources. This proactive approach aimed to break the cycle of economic dependency and ensure that the nation's wealth benefited its citizens. Furthermore, significant investments were made in education and infrastructure development. Recognizing that education is the cornerstone of sustainable development, the government increased funding for schools and implemented programs aimed at improving access to quality education for all children, regardless of their socioeconomic background. Simultaneously, investments in infrastructure focused on improving access to clean water, healthcare facilities, and reliable transportation networks, directly addressing the challenges faced by individuals like Amadou. These policy changes, directly inspired by Traoré's speech and the subsequent movement, have begun to yield tangible results. Access to clean water has improved significantly in many communities, reducing waterborne diseases and freeing up time for children to focus on education rather than arduous water collection. Increased access to healthcare has improved overall public health, while investments in infrastructure have stimulated economic growth and created new employment opportunities. The changes, while still in their early stages, represent a significant step towards a more equitable and prosperous Burkina Faso, demonstrating the potent impact of courageous leadership and a unified national voice. At the heart of President Traoré's message lies a profound shift, a decisive move away from a legacy of dependency towards a future defined by empowerment. His speech wasn't merely a critique of past injustices. It was a clarion call for African nations to reclaim their agency and chart their own destinies. This powerful narrative resonated deeply, not only within Burkina Faso, but across the entire continent, galvanizing a movement that transcends national boundaries. Traoré's challenge to the established global order wasn't one of supplication, but of assertion. He didn't plead for aid, he demanded justice. His powerful indictment of neo-colonial exploitation exposed the mechanisms by which Africa's resources have been systematically depleted and its potential stifled for centuries. This call for justice, rooted in historical truth and present-day realities, became the cornerstone of a movement determined to break free from the shackles of historical oppression. The reclamation of Africa's future is not merely about economic independence. It's about restoring dignity and self-respect. It's about empowering African nations to control their own resources, shape their own policies, and determine their own paths to development. This empowerment is not a gift to be bestowed, but a right to be claimed. It requires a fundamental shift in global power dynamics, a recognition of Africa's inherent worth, and a commitment to fostering truly equitable international relations. This shift from dependency to empowerment is not a utopian ideal. It's a tangible reality taking shape across the continent. The burgeoning Pan-African movement, energized by Traoré's message, is actively challenging the status quo, demanding accountability, and forging new pathways towards a more just and equitable world. The journey is far from over, but the direction is clear. Africa is no longer asking for permission. It is taking its rightful place on the global stage, demanding a future shaped by its own vision and driven by its own strength. The movement, ignited by President Traoré's speech, articulates a clear and unwavering call for justice. This isn't merely a demand for economic redress. It's a comprehensive plea for a fundamental reevaluation of the global economic order and its impact on Africa. At its core lies the urgent need for equitable trade practices, a radical departure from the exploitative agreements that have historically disadvantaged African nations. The movement champions fair pricing for African goods, an end to unfair trade barriers, and the establishment of truly reciprocal economic relationships. Central to this call for justice is the demand for comprehensive debt relief. The crushing burden of debt, a legacy of exploitative lending practices and unsustainable economic policies, continues to hinder Africa's development. The movement advocates for the cancellation of illegitimate debts, freeing up resources that can be redirected towards crucial investments in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. This is not simply about financial relief. It's about dismantling a system that perpetuates economic dependency and undermines African nations' ability to chart their own course. Furthermore, the movement demands an unequivocal end to neo-colonial practices. This includes a thorough examination of existing agreements with foreign corporations, ensuring transparency and fairness in resource extraction and revenue sharing. It demands an end to interference in African internal affairs and a commitment to respecting the sovereignty and self-determination of African nations. This critical aspect of the movement recognizes that true justice requires dismantling the systemic structures that perpetuate inequality and oppression. The call for justice isn't a wish list. It's a roadmap for a more equitable future. It's a powerful articulation of Africa's determination to take control of its destiny, to break free from the chains of historical injustices, and to build a prosperous future for its people, based on principles of fairness, equality, and mutual respect. The movement's demands are not merely aspirational. They're a testament to Africa's unwavering commitment to shaping its own future. Emerging from the powerful discourse ignited by President Traoré's speech is a compelling vision of a self-determined and prosperous Africa. This vision transcends mere economic growth. It embraces sustainable development as a cornerstone of progress. It emphasizes the responsible utilization of natural resources, ensuring that economic advancement doesn't come at the expense of environmental sustainability or future generations. This commitment to a balanced approach ensures that Africa's development is not only economically viable, but also environmentally sound. Central to this vision is economic diversification. The movement recognizes the dangers of over-reliance on a limited range of commodities and advocates for a more robust and resilient economy. This involves investing in diverse sectors, fostering innovation, and developing a skilled workforce capable of driving economic growth across multiple industries. This strategy aims to create a more resilient economy, less susceptible to external shocks, and capable of generating sustainable prosperity for all. Good governance is another critical element of this vision. The movement recognizes that sustainable development and economic prosperity require strong institutions, transparency, and accountability. It champions the rule of law, the protection of human rights, and the active participation of citizens in the political process. This emphasis on good governance is not merely a means to an end. It's an integral part of building a just and equitable society. This vision of Africa's future is not a utopian dream. It's a practical roadmap for achieving sustainable and inclusive development. It's a testament to Africa's unwavering commitment to building a future defined by self-determination, economic prosperity, and social justice. It's a future where the potential of the continent is fully realized, not for the benefit of a few, but for the well-being of all its people. This is the Africa that is emerging, and its strength lies in its collective vision and unwavering determination. President Traoré's speech at the Global Leadership Summit marks a potential turning point, not just for Africa, but for the global landscape. Its impact extends far beyond the immediate policy changes in Burkina Faso. It represents a fundamental shift in the narrative surrounding Africa's relationship with the world. The speech served as a powerful catalyst, igniting a continent-wide movement, demanding a reassessment of historical injustices and a commitment to a more equitable future. The long-term implications are profound. Traoré's courageous confrontation of established power structures has challenged the prevailing Western narratives about African development and fostered a new sense of agency and self-determination. The speech has forced a global reevaluation of neo-colonial practices and their lasting consequences, prompting a much-needed conversation about historical responsibility and the need for genuine partnership rather than exploitative relationships. The impact on international perceptions and policies is already evident. The speech has brought renewed attention to the issue of economic inequality and the need for fair trade practices. It has prompted discussions about debt relief and the importance of empowering African nations to control their own resources and shape their own destinies. The movement inspired by Traoré's speech is forcing a reconsideration of traditional development models and prompting a shift towards more equitable and collaborative approaches to international relations. The speech's resonance extends beyond Africa, impacting global discourse on issues of justice, equality, and self-determination. It has sparked renewed interest in post-colonial studies and critical analyses of global power dynamics. It has served as a powerful reminder that true progress requires a reckoning with the past and a commitment to building a future where all nations are treated with dignity and respect. Whether this marks a definitive turning point in history remains to be seen, but the profound impact of President Traoré's speech is undeniable, signaling a new era of amplified African leadership on the world stage. President Traoré's speech and the subsequent movement have profound implications for the future of global relations, particularly the dynamics between Africa and the West. The speech challenged the established power structures and exposed the lingering effects of neocolonialism, prompting a crucial reassessment of historical relationships. This necessitates a shift from patronizing aid-based partnerships to genuine collaborations built on mutual respect and equitable exchange. The future success of this transition depends on the willingness of Western nations to confront their historical role and commit to a more just and balanced global order. The movement's emphasis on self-determination and economic justice compels a re-evaluation of international cooperation. It calls for a restructuring of global institutions to ensure a more equitable distribution of power and resources. This demands a move away from top-down approaches to development and a greater emphasis on empowering local communities and fostering sustainable, locally driven solutions. The success of this new paradigm hinges on the willingness of international organizations to adapt and embrace a more inclusive and participatory model of global governance. The implications extend beyond the immediate relationship between Africa and the West. The movement's success could inspire similar movements in other regions of the world grappling with historical injustices and economic inequality. This could lead to a fundamental reshaping of global power dynamics, fostering a more multipolar world order where the voices and needs of formerly marginalized nations are heard and addressed. The future of international cooperation rests on the ability of the global community to adapt to this evolving landscape and embrace a more just and equitable framework for global engagement. The legacy of President Traoré's speech will be determined by the extent to which the global community responds to this call for a more just and equitable future. The impact of President Traoré's speech continues to reverberate across the African continent and the global stage. The movement it ignited is not a fleeting phenomenon. It represents a fundamental shift in the consciousness of a generation determined to shape its own destiny. The ongoing renegotiation of contracts, increased investment in education and infrastructure, and improvements in living conditions in Burkina Faso serve as tangible examples of the movement's immediate impact. However, the long-term consequences are far-reaching and will undoubtedly shape the future of Africa's relationship with the world. We can anticipate further policy reforms across the continent as nations strive to achieve economic independence and sustainable development. The movement's emphasis on good governance, transparency, and accountability will likely lead to strengthened institutions and increased citizen participation in the political process. The demand for equitable global trade and debt cancellation will continue to exert pressure on international organizations and developed nations to implement meaningful reforms. The lasting legacy of President Traoré's speech will undoubtedly be the empowerment of African voices and the strengthening of Pan-African solidarity. The movement has demonstrated the power of collective action and the potential for grassroots movements to effect significant change on a global scale. The speech serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of justice and self-determination is not merely an aspiration, but a fundamental human right. It represents a turning point in African history, marking a transition from dependency to empowerment, from victimhood to agency. It is a testament to the resilience and determination of the African people and a beacon of hope for a more just and equitable future for all. The journey towards this future is ongoing, but the seeds of change have been sown, and the harvest promises to be transformative.